Katie, we get questions a lot around the issue of alimony.
Alimony. Definitely. So first of all, everybody knows it as alimony or references it sometimes as alimony, but it's actually maintenance. So maintenance is technically the legal term for spousal support. If you are not a maintenance candidate, then the judge is never going to be able to apply or determine what amount of maintenance you should be paid. Anytime maintenance or spousal support could potentially be an issue, the judge is going to look first to the statute, and that statute is 750 ILCS 5/504. It's easiest to kind of default to what's in the statute, but that doesn't mean that is always going to be what a judge would do. That statute first lays out almost like a step-by-step process. So the very first step is
Well, hello and welcome to the Illinois Family Law Insider. My name is Jeff Hughes and I'm the CEO of Sterling Lawyers. We are an exclusively family law firm here in Illinois, and I have my co-host with me today.
Hi, I'm Katie VanDeusen. I'm the managing partner at Sterling Hughes.
Katie, we get questions a lot around the issue of alimony. That's the popular kind of word that you see in the movies and all that. And you're going to talk about what it's actually called from a legal standpoint here in Illinois. But let's talk through helping clients and those going through a divorce understand how that is determined in our courts by our judges.
Definitely. So first of all, everybody knows it as alimony or references it sometimes as alimony, but it's actually maintenance. So maintenance is technically the legal term for spousal support.
So that'd be a payment from one spouse to the other during as well as after the divorce has been granted, right?
Correct. Exactly. It's from one spouse to another or an ex-spouse to another ex-spouse. And it's usually reserved in situations where you have one person who is not able to financially support themselves.
Okay. So the parties have filed for divorce and they get into the action, and one spouse has an income that would be, let's just hypothetically say, 4 times the income of the other spouse. And let's say it's been a marriage of, hypothetically now, of 20 years, which is a very common fact pattern that we see quite a bit. Can you just walk through the process for how that's going to unfold in the court system and what the judge is going to do by way of looking at it legally?
Yeah, so anytime maintenance or spousal support could potentially be an issue, the judge is going to look first to the statute, and that statute is 750 ILCS 5/504.
That is the most important statute for folks to read as they're going through a case if maintenance is an issue, right? So get really familiar with that is what I'm saying, if that's an issue in your case, because that is the language of the judge and you want to be able to speak that.
Absolutely. So that statute first lays out almost like a step-by-step process. So the very first step is the judge in any given case has to decide or determine that one spouse or soon to be ex-spouse is a maintenance candidate. So if you are not a maintenance candidate based on the facts or the circumstances, then the judge is never going to be able to apply or determine what amount of maintenance you should be paid. After, let's assume that the person is found to be a maintenance candidate, then the judge is going to take the next steps of deciding how long should this maintenance payment last, so the duration, and what amount is appropriate, whether they apply a statutory formula or if they deviate from that formula either up or down. And the same could apply for the duration. There are set, I would say, for the most part, it's easiest to kind of default to what's in the statute. So there's a statutory formula, but that doesn't mean that that is always going to be what a judge would do.
Okay.
Once they're presented with certain evidence.
So you've dropped a lot here, some really great stuff, but let me kind of break it down step by step. Okay. So you said that a judge would have to first determine if a party is a candidate to receive maintenance. What does that look like? And is that like a completely separate court event? Like what goes on there?
So, what that entails is one party typically is going to file a petition requesting that relief. And then the judge is going to determine, based on a list of factors, whether or not the person is a candidate for maintenance. Those factors could be length of marriage, one party taking a step away from a career to help at home with the kids. It could also be difference in earning capacity or earning potential, income level, level of education for each spouse. So it really is dependent. It's not a black and white type of analysis.
Okay. So the judge will look at all those factors in that statute that you mentioned. And let's say the judge says, yes, party A, you are a candidate to receive maintenance. So that first hurdle now has been overcome. It's been jumped through. Before we get into the next like hurdle or the next steps in the process, can you just kind of share generally? Now I know you're a super great family lawyer and you're probably going to say depends on this. I know it's coming, but what I'm trying to get at is can we give our listeners some general ranges? Like if your marriage is between this and this, then you're in the gray. If you're, what are the lengths that you kind of look for, and then what are the disparities in income that you look for?
Yeah, so again,
I know that's like a 3-day seminar. I totally understand. You spent like 15 years figuring this out, but I want people to kind of understand that, you can't be married 2 years and have the same income or be a couple $100 apart and expect to get
yeah,
maintenance. That won't happen, right?
no, that's exactly right. It has to be somewhat of a sizable discrepancy where, again, in order to be a maintenance candidate, you have to prove that there's a financial need there and that you are unable to independently financially support yourself. So it can't be, a situation where there's only $10,000 a year of a difference between the income levels. I think that would not really rise to the level of a maintenance candidate.
Yeah.
Typically, what I would look for is a sizable discrepancy in income levels.
Hmm.
And then the longer the duration of marriage, the higher the likelihood is that the maintenance will be longer term. And actually, in that statute itself, there's a formula for not only the amount of maintenance, so it's a percentage of the person who's paying their income minus a percentage of the person who's receiving the maintenance award, their income. And then there's a cap associated with the amount of maintenance. When it comes to duration, the statute specifically lays out certain time frames. So depending on how long you've been married for, that will then, increase the duration of maintenance that you would be expected to pay if the other spouse was a maintenance candidate.
Okay, I got it. So would you feel comfortable kind of giving like an example for a very typical fact pattern in a typical county? Because I know every county is a little different. Judges within counties are a little different. All that stuff applies, right? That's why this is one of the areas of the law that I tell people don't do this on your own. Get a lawyer, but we're trying to help folks that are on their own right now. So if what would be a typical fact pattern that the court would award maintenance from a compensation amount standpoint or a dollar amount standpoint, and then a length standpoint to give a frame of reference?
Yeah, so I would say typically, if we're assuming that the person is a maintenance candidate, the judge would calculate or determine what 33 and a third percent of the net of the person who's expected to pay, what their income level is. And then they would end up taking that amount minus 25% of the net of the person who's receiving maintenance. And that would kind of give an amount. However, that amount, when added to the person who's receiving maintenance, when you add the maintenance award to their income, it cannot exceed 40% of their combined net income. So it's meant to be a cap, and it's meant so that there's not a windfall from one party to the other.
Yeah.
Um,
Okay.
and then let's say, for example, they've been married for 7.5 years, well, then you would go to the statute, and the statute breaks it down where if, let's say, it was 7 years or more, but less than 8 years, the multiplier for that length of marriage would be 0.32. So you would end up taking 7.5 multiplied by 0.32, and that will give you almost like the default of what the duration of that maintenance award could look like if that individual is a maintenance candidate.
And I know that we have some calculators on our website, sterlinglawyers.com, that can help people plug those numbers in as well.
Yeah, I would tell you, it's always important to meet with an attorney because sometimes people will misunderstand or misinterpret what net income is. And you just have to be careful that you're not pulling net income from taxes, let's say off your tax return or off your pay stub. It really is specific to the statute, not necessarily what the IRS determines as net income, or so it's just a little nuanced.
Yeah, that's where I would naturally go to, is like, what does Uncle Sam say that I make? And that should be the rule, right? That should be what controls. But
Yeah, it doesn't, unfortunately.
lawmakers had other opinions for that, didn't they?
So that'd be too easy.
Yeah, it would be applying the formula. Okay, so once it's been determined that the party's eligible, the judge then goes through the calculations after some fact finding and then issues an order. And at the end of it, the parties will come out of that with an order for the amount and an order for the length, right?
Yes. Yep.
Okay.
And then also the other thing to keep in mind is the type of maintenance. So sometimes you can have fixed term maintenance that terminates after a set period of time. You could also have reviewable maintenance, which the court would review upon filing of a proper petition after a set duration of time. Or you could have indefinite maintenance, which could be much longer amount of time.
Sounds really scary and very long.
Yeah, a lot of times people think indefinite somehow means permanent, and that's not always the case. Again, each case is so unique and individual to the parties, and you do have to consider certain things like age, retirement at a reasonable age, which again is different pursuant to each county and each judge. So there are a lot of different factors, and it can be definitely a little overwhelming and complex for people.
So I think that's an important point to stress, is that we've got the law here in Illinois, right? Where this is the formula, this is the application, these are the factors. But then you've got a whole host of different judges in different counties, and our dozens and dozens of counties that would interpret that law a bit differently, right?
Yeah, and again, it's like the formula is not something that the judge has to do. So a judge can make certain findings and decide to deviate in some way from the formula, depending on what evidence or facts exist in a given case.
They're more like suggestions, quite honestly. It seems like this is what we suggest you do, judge, but you decide because you're closer to the parties than the lawmakers are.
Correct.
Yeah. And I know that it seems like counties, the judges get together and they kind of set their general policies for the county. And that seems to be how the different counties address it. So you could have different results in one county to the next.
Yeah, I mean, I think it just is natural. Even within counties, each individual judge is different too. How they view things, their personal life experience, what they bring to their decision making. So I know that that's probably not the best way to answer this, but it's like each judge is going to look at things uniquely and differently, and based on their own life experience or personal viewpoints, their opinions, what they think is appropriate or not in any given case. So even within counties, you can have certain individuals that may be vastly different or see a fact pattern vastly differently based on those, personal circumstances.
Yeah. Well, good. Thank you. This has been really helpful today, Katie, walking us through how this works and how the law is applied to spousal support and maintenance here in Illinois. Well, if you've received value from this video, we have a bunch of other videos on our website and on YouTube to help clients just like you understand how the process works for divorce in Illinois.